I describe right now as the between times for AI. So we're not fully into the future, but we're not really out of the past either. We're still trying to figure out this AI thing together. And in any between times, technology agnostic, there's going to be some mistakes, what I call AI uh-oh moments. We haven't seen a lot of uh-oh moments, but one that happened recently was when AI acted as Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. That could have had a lot of impact. But that right,
Yes.
but AI is pretty new still, and that was pretty good. So as it gets better, what else could happen? There's risks in medicine by using data and then implementing AI. And I think it's really important for companies to double down on the responsible and ethical AI practices. I know that sounds cliche, but a lot of companies don't have that established yet.
Welcome to this episode of the MedTech 101 podcast. And today it's something that I really been wanting to talk about for some time because it involves um like a really cool guy called Ben Tasker, who basically was the former like dean of AI at Southern New Hampshire University, but then he has since left that role and now he's gone to being like a senior AI specialist at a utilities company. But he also did some work in medtech, so it's quite really an exciting podcast in terms of like versatility, because no one would connect these dots, and it's one of those things I like to bring on the podcast, to bring something new. And yeah, so without really much of a delay, welcome to the podcast, Ben.
So thanks for having me, Rodney. I'm Ben Tasker. I'm an AI expert. Currently, I'm leading an AI academy, which is focused on global upskilling and reskilling for the utility sector. What that means is that I'm helping 36,000 individuals amplify themselves with AI and applied AI applications. Before I embarked on that adventure, I was the former Dean of AI at Southern New Hampshire University. I was focused on skills based learning for the university. What that means is, again, corporate upskilling and reskilling, more short form learning, introducing academia to the workforce and creating an ecosystem so that employees at a company can upskill and reskill quickly in the time of AI. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you very much. And I think just to even go back a bit, just to take a step back for people listening, like what does a normal workshop or session look like when you basically upscaling or rescaling individuals? Like, is it mostly like motivational work, and or is it like mostly basically going back to the drawing board and saying, okay, these are the skills sets you have, this is what you need to do in the meantime to sort of like close the gap? How does that look like, Ben?
So, in the world of AI and data, there's a lot going on and things are happening very exponentially. So things are happening quickly. Companies are making decisions, letting entire departments go. That really creates a shift from the olden days where if individuals were let go, eventually those jobs were replaced. We're not really sure how that's going to land with AI. My job is to assess organizations to make sure that there's the right skills within the organization. So if you're a project manager, if you're in marketing, if you're an AI specialist or expert, do you have current skills and future skills in AI and data? So we do what's called a skills assessment and a skills taxonomy. So we look at everybody in the entire organization, see what they're really good at, and then see for opportunities for growth. And then we create our learning journeys or learning pathways around those areas for growth. That way the company can better orient itself to the future and individuals feel challenged and can orient themselves through multiple offerings, including workshops, but not just exclusively workshops around AI and data. So, what this might look like is asynchronous courses. It might look like a workshop. It could be a podcast. Learning can be fun. It doesn't all have to be academic, it can be your own adventure. So, with AI, for example, maybe you haven't used it before and you start to, if you like cooking, maybe you create a recipe with AI, right? You get into it. It's not really you're not really learning a lot yet, but that might intrigue you to learn more.
True. No, that's quite interesting, really, to hear that. And I think a lot of gaps actually do exist because AI is new technology for most people who've been working for like several decades. I mean, most people in my generation, for example, will be experiencing AI like for the first time in their workforce, and it's needed, right? It's kind of something that's needed, but at the same time, I know this is what you do, and like you're really good at that. And like your journey, even from like the university to the utilities company, has been basically a continuation of basically also kind of helping people bridge that gap. And but obviously, like, since like there's like medtech 101, like I don't want to ignore the fact that you've also worked on an AI system that basically works to identify cancer as well, in terms of like, risk that patients might have, etc. Like what could you tell us about what that AI system was like, or what it's like since it's already in existence?
Sure. Before we get to the AI system, let's take a few steps back, and I'm going to tell you my own upskilling and reskilling journey, which got me to that point. So, when I graduated from my bachelor's degrees, I wanted to be a healthcare administrator. I was really excited about it. It was one of my first jobs right out of school. I worked at a hospital, and my first task at that job was to determine which offices should be open during what time. So, what medical practices should be open when was the task. I thought hospitals had the latest, greatest data. Everything was available at your fingertips. This wasn't that long ago, even though I guess it depends on who you ask, even though it could be some time ago. But we were still in the 21st century, and data and digital data existed. So I thought, oh, no problem. I could just query a database and we have it. Turns out that some of the data in the database was missing, so I had to go out to doctors' offices. They would hand me, the physicians would hand me stacks of paper to figure out what the counts were. Uh, Exaggerating here, but they would also pull out a stone tablet to, read, whatever data they had have there. It was very archaic, and that's when I realized the opportunity, and I didn't realize it at the time, for data science and AI, because it was just starting to form at that time. But that's when I really saw the lack of data literacy, not just for myself, but for individuals that work with it all the time. Physicians collect data on patients regularly, almost to the minute. So to see them do everything by paper was interesting. That then caused me to really want to focus on my own upskilling and reskilling. So I went out and got my master's degree in data science and data analytics. For me, it was very interesting because I already had that management background. I already have my undergraduate degree in that. So, what else could I learn that I don't already know? So, programming, the AI algorithms, how to implement those algorithms, the strategy. I really got to unlock a lot of doors, and data science quickly turned into AI, which is really the fundament. That program really was the cornerstone of my theoretical AI, the algorithms education, which I'm going to talk about, and how I developed this other algorithm later. But my first job out of now my master's degree was working for a community college system, and at that community college system, the major project there was developing a warning system for the students at the highest risk of failure. So individuals that probably aren't going to complete their degree program. That way, that system could release resources, tutoring, maybe changing their schedule, outreaching the student, a bunch of different methods. That way, that student would become more successful. The probability would increase. And what I saw there was that now individuals with the power of AI can be amplified. That's more of a human centric problem. The first problem when I decided to get into when I decided to go back to school, when I that was also a human centric problem, but it wasn't really data science driven. It was more of quasi demand forecasting. With a success metric, you have to really determine what makes someone successful and not successful. So we had to measure data features like time away from school, so how far they commuted, time out of school, so have you not been to school in 40 years and you're coming back, the degree program, your GPA, different GPA, so like a math GPA. That way, if you're in a more technical program, we knew you might need a little bit more math help. But that also helped that college system reallocate funding for different types of help. So if they knew a lot of people might need math tutoring, they could then invest a lot more into math tutoring and maybe less in something that's not going to be as impactful. That algorithm then transformed. So I was working with some faculty members there. That then led me into healthcare. So I went from healthcare to education to healthcare. And in healthcare, similar data sets, similar flagging system, but now instead of dealing with students, we're dealing with patients. And I work for the oncology department, and oncology is cancer for individuals listening that may not know that. And cancer's pretty, people don't like the word, it's pretty significant. I was in a rural hospital in the state of Maine, and the main goal was to try to figure out populations that have an above normal cancer reading or potential cancer reading. What that means is if you're not that likely to get cancer, these individuals are either very likely to pretty much almost guaranteed to get cancer. So how can you look at data? So starting at the data, the root cause of the problem before we even get to an algorithm. So there's a lot of data on this. We also were missing some data components, but labs, what actually came back is diagnosis, the patients that we currently knew, all their demographic information like age, gender, occupation, an EMR system, electronic medical record system, the system that physicians and clinical staff type in when you probably go see a doctor in the United States. That's a very robust system. It's almost so robust it was the counterintuitive problem of the college system where we didn't have enough data. This problem is we had so much data. What do we want to focus
Well,
on? One way
that's
to,
that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work.
especially for a data scientist, because we don't, so we practice on how to make algorithms, but we don't, right? Like it's a different problem.
Yeah. Hmm. Because essentially, people say that a data science degree is essentially like another maths degree, and I think most of the AI components of or the computing parts of AI do are derived from essentially mathematical algorithms in terms of how it learns, how it does everything. So it really connects well that way, and it makes a lot of sense, like the work you've been doing, because I think a lot of it, not only has it reduced the like the administrative tasks that sort of like healthcare professionals might have to use, or even just people in universities, students, etc. And it has like interlinked applications that also benefit medtech. um I'm quite surprised and or interested in terms of how you're able to then, like, sort of like focus the AI to kind of filter from the huge database you had, because as you said, for most people the problem they have is usually not having enough data. But in your case, there was so much data you had to now kind of sift through. And how was that process in terms of getting, like sort of like approvals for that, or permissions for that consent? Because I think that's what people will be thinking as well. So maybe you could indulge us on how that process was to just get to the point where you had this AI system that actually had a good efficacy rate, and where it's currently being applied at the minute.
Sure. So now we're at the point of the story where we have all this data and we have to figure out what to do with it.
Yeah.
And one way to do that is by visualizing the data. So data storytelling, still not really in the data science work yet, but most data science works 80-20, 80% setting up all the data and then 20% is actually doing what you need to do with it. The way I chose to visualize this data was on a map. That way, by having all these different points for all these different diagnoses, you could see different colors. The physicians in the room could see different colors. It really quantified what we had. The color doesn't so much matter, but one data point really stuck out to this group, especially the physicians, and that was stomach cancer. And stomach cancer can be caused for a plethora of reasons, many reasons. One reason is very specific to rural areas, and this was more of a hunch than it was data science. But one of the physicians said it looks like most of these stomach cancer patients are coming from the most rural of this rural state. What do we have in that area that would cause this? And then one of the other physicians said, well water. So a private well attached to your house. So well water needs to be filtered, cleaned, pumped regularly. There's a lot of components to a well, and if it's not maintained, there could be an increased risk, especially if there's metals in the water that that an individual could get cancer on. So this data science project quickly turned into a public health campaign. We had to engage with these areas, so we had to go meet with clergy, schools, get water tests into the hospital, and then to your point, what are we going to actually do with this? So the algorithm that was used was called K nearest neighbors. So it was more of a clustering technique. It was unsupervised learning versus supervised learning. Supervised learning versus unsupervised learning, because we knew these data points existed, and we grouped them together to figure out more probable areas versus others. And we also had the data from folks in that area that we knew had this cancer. So you roughly knew if someone lived on specific streets or specific areas who you should outreach. So it wasn't the most advanced algorithm, but it was more of that visualization that the
Yeah.
physicians didn't think of. But then that turned into, okay, so how are we going to actually scan for cancer in these patients? So we had to do free labs, free screenings. We had to get we had to pay for media to go out there and do news coverage and brochures. It was very boots on the ground. And just to be totally transparent, in a data science program, they teach a little bit about those, what I call that human skill, but it's not the most human skill designed degree program. I really needed to get out of my comfort zone to make sure that the data points that we were collecting were accurate and that we were actually addressing the problem, which was decreasing the amount of positive stomach cancer rates. So after a couple grants, getting more individuals involved, really building that knowledge base and offering making sure your well's cleaned and free water testing and some other measures that are health adjacent, we were able to see that threshold decrease by almost a full standard deviation, which is it's thousands of people that were saved by this human centric AI approach. But it was really from the combination of my experiences, so going through the college system and trying to predict student success, to predicting patient outcomes. So now we could create a flagging system based upon what comes back from the labs to then encourage us to go check to see if anyone else might be out in this community that has something similar. They're just not in the system yet, or they're in the system and they haven't had an oncology screening.
Well, and that's actually quite cool, actually, because I think most people will not be thinking that that maybe what they take inside their bodies, whether it's like drinking water, food, um, is actually leading to like maybe an increased chance of them developing cancer of some sort. So it's quite interesting that you say that, Ben, and it's not the most, well, I would say it's not the most craziest AI application I've heard in terms of reducing cancer, but it's actually something that works when you put all this data on a map, and then all of a sudden you see high risk areas and stuff like that. And I'm quite curious in terms of how is it still being implemented? Has it been integrated into other systems, perhaps like other big government organizations or private institutions that are using this technology now, like, or this algorithm or this kind of thought process, at least making sure people have sufficient like clean water or healthy resources, particularly for things that people may not even really pay attention to.
So the health campaign's still going. They still offer free screening, water testing. There's still continual outreach. But this project also was a springer board for another project at the same hospital, a little bit different but similar. And this is getting more into AI. So the complexity of the projects are increasing as the technology gets better. But what we found with this population was that it was more reactive versus proactive. So yes, we were trying to mitigate the cancer rate, but in most cases, after a lot of folks get tested, they had pre-stage 1 cancer, or a lot of components that would lead to that. There's this whole other component of medicine of trying to predict things so they don't occur. And one of the largest areas in the healthcare system that needs that prediction is what's called the cardiac thoracic intensive care unit, the CTICU. So heart patients in the most critical care. And in this unit, there are events called adverse events. So in a CTICU, there's heart surgeries, heart bypasses. So you're cut open at your chest, your heart's exposed. A lot can happen when your heart's exposed. You can have an infection. You can be transmitted to sepsis or introduced to sepsis just by having your heart out in the open, and a bunch of other things that hopefully you never experience in your life. But if you're already in the most critical care and you get one of these adverse events, the likelihood of you surviving gets lower and lower the longer you're in the CTICU. So a pre-prediction is incredibly powerful. So in most healthcare systems, especially in the United States, there's a bedside monitor. And that bedside monitor has different vitals on it depending on what unit you're in. But in the CTICU, you will probably have heart rate, blood pressure, and and a few other characteristics. But the main two are the two that I just pointed out.
Well, no, that's actually exciting. Um, in the sense that sometimes you don't really realize this, and it if anything, it has just made me realize the importance that people like embrace AI or they take on AI in their life, and part of your job is teaching people about AI. And so as much this was the medical applications of it, but just in general, because I feel like if people pick up AI in one aspect of their life, they're more likely to accept it in other aspects of their life because they realize the efficiency it brings them. So, like, what would you say, like, for people listening right now who are not so sure, who are not so comfortable with AI tools and stuff, like, since you're like the like the best person or like the teacher of this, like, where do you usually start with people, um, in terms of upskilling them in terms of them being able to use AI more, just out of curiosity?
Before we even get to the
Mm.
upskilling and reskilling component of this,
Yes.
the physicians and clinical teams were mostly dead against it just because, to your point, they were what I would consider AI resistant, and they already had this other algorithm based on evidence-based medicine, so something that happens a lot over time. It's called an STS algorithm, and they're like, our STS algorithm is 93, 95% effective. This AI algorithm sure might get us to 96, 97, but it's going to cost too much. I'm already busy enough. We have patients here in critical conditions. We really don't need your help. So one way to help win individuals over is not everybody felt that way. So finding a physician, finding a care team that wanted to embrace it, and slow rolling it. So starting with the minimal viable product before what you see today, what we wanted it to look like, what the visualizations could look like, not calling it an algorithm, calling it a flagging system. That way they can still use their current tools and algorithm that they're used to without having to change all the clinical processes. But before you, so now we kind of have the mindset of, okay, we can do this and we're moving in that direction. Then how do you train people on AI? Because most people, even if you're a clinician, think of AI as ChatGPT, and in this case, not even the same wheelhouse as ChatGPT. To do that, we really had to break down what data we were collecting, create a committee, have the committee help make those definitions. Then we had the clinicians input on what they thought it was and how they wanted to not only train other clinicians, but how they would train patients. So, do we have a moral responsibility to let individuals know that we're using AI on our medical floors when we're using it? And what is it? Like, what is the A and what is the I? Because a lot of individuals coming in might not have ever heard it, or maybe they're older and maybe it's a technology tool. Maybe they don't want to use it. So, like other tools, there's consent forms and there's brochures, and there's clinical educators that come into the room and can show you what AI is. Also, so this is going through time, so AI is progressing as we're trying to launch this project. Some clinicians are bringing in something similar to chat gpt into the care rooms at this point, so it could take notes. So now, and some patients really like that, and they started to ask more questions about AI, what else is being used around the healthcare system, because the clinicians were able to spend, they felt like it was more personalized, and the clinicians, like, I don't have to take as comprehensive notes, even though they still do have to take notes. You're just not sitting there typing on a computer sitting in front of you. So it's really integrating all the important points. So people, product, privacy, and in this case patient, or the person that's going to consume your product, and where are they, what's the average user, creating that user persona, and then making sure that you're attaching the right value inputs to the individual. So for the patient, they want to get better care, they want to be heard and more personalized, they want to keep coming back. For the clinician, they want to save time, they want as good of outcomes or better, or what's the incentive for me to change. For the product, what do we have to do to implement this? Since we're using it as a flagging system, you still have to go through different levels of governance, but uh, you don't need the same level of governance as a prescription, for example, because it's a tool. It's not prescribing an adverse event. It's just saying there could be one. You should go check this out before one occurs. So it's similar to different flagging algorithms the hospital may use. Does that help
Nice.
you answer your question?
No, definitely it does. It does answer the question, I think, in even greater depth. That sort of like brings me towards like towards the end, and I'm just kind of curious, with everything you've mentioned. I think to paint a better picture of everything you've mentioned, it's basically what most digital health companies are doing right now. So they're basically finding ways they can take AI and basically put an app on someone's phone, and then it tells you whether you like based on whatever like health symptoms it gets from you, whether it's your sleep patterns or things like that, in terms of maybe what you eat or your pills that you're supposed to be taking. And then it kind of creates a sort of like a personalized sort of like feedback like interface for you, and it helps you essentially, so it makes life a lot easier. And we've seen like a lot of like a huge boom like in the industry because of that. Like digital health is like something that's really going up alongside like other applications of AI that are actually quite direct, whether it's like AI helping doctors read x-ray scans or things like that. And yeah, so there's like a huge importance of that. But like having said all this, and I think like the nice thing about having you here, Ben, is that you coming on a more of like the fundamental point of AI, not like coming with any bias towards AI's application in reading X-rays. You bringing more of like the fundamentals in terms of what actually it does. So my question is, like from the fundamentals about AI, for example, that you go around teaching people and everything, like where do you think like the future is going? What does it mean for people? Like, do you think that there's a lot of pipeline, like on the fundamental roots of AI that are still yet to be used by people, or do you think that we're already using the maximum capacity we at? And like, what's your predictions in the future in terms of its applications?
I describe right now as the between times for AI. So we're not fully into the future, but we're not really out of the past either. We're still trying to figure out this AI thing together. And in any between times, technology agnostic, there's going to be some mistakes, what I call AI uh-oh moments. We haven't seen a lot of uh-oh moments, but one that happened recently was when AI acted as Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. That could have had a lot of impact. But that right,
Yes.
but AI is pretty new still, and that was pretty good. So as it gets better, what else could happen? There's risks in medicine by using data and then implementing AI. And I think it's really important for companies to double down on the responsible and ethical AI practices. I know that sounds cliche, but a lot of companies don't have that established yet. Similar to what we did at the hospital, a lot of different individuals from the community created definitions, protocol steps of if there was a data breach, what would happen? What data points are we collecting? Which ones do we never need? What's the minimum amount of data do we need to make these predictions? How are we going to communicate this to our users? And I also think with a good responsible AI strategy and implementation, then users will be less resistance to AI. There's usually more bad news around AI than good news, at least in the between times. There's there's a company always laying off because of AI. There, people are afraid to lose their job around AI, and now it's coming into my healthcare and my health. I can see the apprehension around it. So, with a clear and transparent communication, even by seeing the data that they're collected, that the company's collecting on the individual, I think would be increased transparency, tenfold. And in other countries, companies do have to provide the data that they collect back to the individuals. There's also this idea of data sharing. So if I have data in a system and a company sells it to a different company, uh, I would get a little bit of a kickback for that since they're using my data to make profit. That doesn't really happen in the United States, or at least I haven't heard of it. That's all responsible AI. Trickling out of responsible AI and some getting through that AI moment, which definitely is going to happen. Uh, the next step is really, I think there's so many AI applications and med tech or ed tech or fintech startups that are going to try to embrace it that individuals and companies are going to be a little confused on what's what. One thing I do think we're going to see a lot of though is more personalized care. What do you think the top use of an LLM like ChatGPT or a chatbot is right now, Rodney?
Um, like in general, like what people
Yeah.
usually use it for, I think people just use it more as like a search engine, basically. I think it's becoming a search engine. If anything, people use it to just search stuff. Like, for example, my friends that I know, things that are normally searched on Google, they now just go on ChatGPT and search that. So I don't know, am I correct or wrong?
So that's the fourth reason. The number one reason is therapy and companionship. So
Well,
individuals are going out to a chatbot and asking for advice how to navigate a difficult situation. Maybe they see a therapist, but they need a little bit more support, so they're using the chatbot as a therapist. That's a major, I think, shift in the use of AI. But it also shows that individuals are embracing this more, and that's probably a top AI use for med tech companies is integrating empathy, therapy, that personalized care. Mental health, especially in America, is usually everybody right now is having a mental health crisis. So how do you address that supply and demand need? AI can help address it. Back bringing this back to responsible and ethical AI, though, what's the risk to that? Because AI, to your point, is highly personalized. You're using it as, or your friends are using it as a search engine. So if it just shows you something back that you want to hear, is that really empathy? Is that really companionship? I can't answer those questions, but I think it's just right. It's just feeding receptors in your brain, right?
true, true. No, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that answer, Ben. It touched on many points and even got me thinking as well. So, but for people listening right now, if they want to reach out to you, I know you've recently moved and stuff to the utilities company. Where could the best reach you? Is it like LinkedIn or where in particular are you most
Yeah,
accessible?
you can follow me and reach out to me on LinkedIn, Ben Tasker, and I also have a website, bentaskerai.com. If you need help creating an upskilling and reskilling plan for your organization, that's the best place to reach me at.
All right, guys. So you had that, and thank you very much, Ben, for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Rodney.